Chapter 141. My thoughts swirled like a tempest as I pieced together the implications of what I just learned. Swordsmanship talent grades. It wasn't something that had been touched upon in the saga of the Divine Swordsman. At least not explicitly. But now, standing here in the heart of Mount Hua and getting the fragments of information from Master Li and Seraphina, it clicked into place. This wasn't just about how good you were with a sword. It wasn't about how many hours you'd spent drenched in sweat and blood on a training field. This was something far more unfair. Something far more innate. Something more absolute. Talent.
Pure, unalterable talent.
A grade 5 talent meant you had the potential to create a grade 5 art. Not just master it. Not just refine it. But create it. Something entirely your own. A unique mark on the world of swordsmanship. The creation of arts, as it turned out, was less about skill and more about the genetic and mystical hand you'd been dealt by the universe. The cold, unyielding hierarchy of talent dictated what heights you could reach, no matter how hard you worked. In an already unfair world, this was the most damning blow. Even those with skill, grit, and relentless drive could hit a wall they would never break through. Talent, it seemed, was the unscalable mountain that those without could only look up at from below. And now I had confirmation of my place on that mountain. Grade 6 talent. The very same grade as Lucifer Windward. The very same as the Martial King himself. A talent so rare that it reshaped the air in the room just by existing. Li's words echoed in my head. Grade 6 talent. I felt the weight of those 3 words settle over me. A grade 6 swordsmanship talent wasn't just an acknowledgement of skill. It was a declaration. It meant I had the capacity to create a grade 6 art or even evolve an existing one to heights no one else could imagine. Li rubbed his chin thoughtfully, muttering more to himself than to me. No, in terms of pure talent, you might be better than even Sunday. Sun Zenith, Seraphina's adopted brother. The prodigy of Mount Hua adopted by the sect leader when he was but a child orphan. A swordsman who had once been hailed as the future of the sect and the holder of grade 6 talent. Even called the Divine Dragon of Mount Hua in the novel. But according to Li Zenith, his own uncle, no less, I surpassed even him. That was the thing about grades, wasn't it? They gave you the general shape of someone's potential, but there were still layers within those grades. Just because Sun and I both had grade 6 talent didn't mean we were equals. There were still levels to this. Li studied me like one might study a curious artifact. His gaze was equal parts awe and scrutiny. He wasn't just seeing a student anymore, he was seeing potential. Possibility. A spark that could ignite into something unstoppable. I tightened my grip on the wooden sword at my side, the reality of it all sinking in. My father, for all his strength and guidance, likely hadn't possessed more than grade 4 talent. After all, if he had even grade 5 talent, he would have been able to elevate his grade 4 art to grade 5. The leap from that to this, it wasn't just a small, petty difference. It was absurd. Absurd. That was the only word for it. Well then, Li began, stroking his chin as if weighing the cosmos on his fingertips. You want to create a grade 6 art out of that light mana spell of yours, don't you? It's ambitious, but... His lips curled into a small smirk. You must have realized by now that keeping it in spell form is limiting. Exactly, I said, nodding. The frustration of it had been gnawing at me for weeks. A spell, no matter how powerful, was always tethered to its circle count and casting limitations. But a movement within a grade 6 art? That would transcend those boundaries entirely, bringing fluidity, adaptability, and far more destructive power. Ridiculous spellcasting talent on top of that, an affinity for both dark and light magic, Li muttered, shaking his head like he was trying to piece me together. Honestly, Seraphina, you've dragged an absolute anomaly to Mount Hua. Seraphina, standing quietly to the side, just tilted her head in response, as though this was the most ordinary thing in the world. Li sighed, a sound that carried both exasperation and a begrudging kind of admiration. I have no choice, do I? Someone like you. If I don't take you as my disciple, I'd be insulting the heavens. My chest tightened, and for a brief moment, I could feel the weight of what he'd just said. A high immortal rank swordsman of Mount Hua, the greatest swordsman sect in the world, had just offered to take me under his wing. Thank you, master, I said, bowing low, the words coming out with a rare sincerity I couldn't suppress. All right then, he said, clapping his hands together, his tone immediately shifting to one of amusement. You've signed up for Mount Hua training now, boy. Let's see if you can handle it without crying to Sarah. Serafina shot him a flat look, the barest flicker of warmth in her silver eyes. But, Lee continued, waving a hand toward the distant training fields, before we throw you into the grinder, let's sit down and have a chat. We'll discuss the theory behind how to turn that flashy god flash of yours into something worthy of a grade 6 art. Follow me. He led me and Serafina through a maze of winding stone paths, past courtyards where disciples were sparring under the watchful eyes of their elders. The sounds of clashing swords and shouted instructions echoed through the air, a symphony of discipline and ambition. Finally, we arrived at a modest room, sparsely furnished with a low table and cushions. All right, Serafina, Lee said, turning to her. Off you go. This is between me and your friend. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment, searching, before she nodded and slipped out the door without a word. Lee took a seat, gesturing for me to do the same. Now then, he said, leaning forward, his tone losing its usual lightness. Grade 6 arts. Let me tell you something, Arthur. These aren't just techniques. They're monuments to talent. I nodded, already sensing where he was going. The weight of the word talent had been looming over me ever since I'd arrived here. Talent, he said, his voice almost a whisper now, is the single most important thing in this world. It doesn't care about effort. It doesn't care about how many sleepless nights you've spent training or how much blood you've spilled. In the face of true talent, hard work is meaningless. Talent makes hard work useless. The words hit like a hammer, and yet they resonated. I'd heard something similar before from Professor Gravemore, when he spoke of summoning sentient undead, the pinnacle of necromancy. The wall of talent, he'd called it. An insurmountable barrier that separated the chosen few from everyone else. And now, here it was again, casting its shadow over swordsmanship. The wall of talent, I muttered under my breath, more to myself than to him. Lee raised an eyebrow, then nodded. Exactly. And yet, you've somehow scaled that wall without breaking a sweat. Grade 6 swordsmanship talent. That's a gift so rare, it changes the rules of the game. He leaned back, his gaze sharpening. But don't let that go to your head. Talent alone won't make this easy. Especially not with what you're trying to do. I straightened, my focus sharpening as he continued. Since you're aiming to turn God Flash into a movement for a grade 6 art, you'll need to understand what separates an art from a spell. Spells are constructs of mana, rigid, structured, bound by their circle. Movements, however, are tied to the essence of the body and soul. They transcend the rigid framework of mana. They're alive. He tapped the table between us, his finger punctuating each word. Body and soul. Those are the two aspects you'll need to focus on. The mind aspect can take a back seat here. It's important, but not the crux of the art. I nodded, absorbing his words like a sponge. How do I start? Lee's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Patience. First, we'll break down your God Flash. You'll need to reimagine it, not as a spell but as an extension of yourself. A movement that compounds not with mana, but with your intent, your breath, your will. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with excitement. And that, Arthur, is where the Real challenge begins. Are you ready? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words, the weight of the task ahead. I'm ready. Chapter 142. Creating a grade 6 art was like trying to compose a symphony on a broken piano in the middle of a relentless hurricane. The wind of logic and precision battered you from every side, demanding method and technique, while the howling storm of raw, unbridled creativity threatened to tear your careful plans to shreds. It wasn't a matter of cold equations or tidy scribbles on parchment, though those had their place. No, it demanded something more elusive. Imagination. Not just the dreamy, whimsical kind, though that played its part. This was imagination harnessed by discipline, shaped by intent, and fueled by raw emotion. It wasn't enough to dream. You had to believe in that dream. Feel it coil around your identity until it became inseparable from who you were, until its shape and form were yours, not borrowed from someone else's story. That was where I was hopelessly stuck. Because if I was honest, God Flash wasn't really mine. In the original novel, it had been Lucifer's crowning technique, his creation, his triumph. I'd plucked it off the page like a thief at a bazaar, filching his masterpiece for my own. I'd altered it here and there, replacing the original lightning magic with light magic, nudging its structure to fit my constraints. But in the end, it remained a borrowed blade, not something shaped from the fires of my own soul. If I wanted to elevate it into the opening movement of a true grade 6 art, I had to do more than bolt on a few modifications. I needed to reforge it, reimagine it, invest it with my blood, sweat, and will until it belonged to me in a way no stolen technique ever could. That was why I was here, sitting on a rock, clad in swim trunks, with my arms folded against the bitter cold. A picturesque scene on paper, maybe something out of a holiday postcard, if you missed the crucial detail that the waterfall looming above me was trying to kill me. And by waterfall, I really mean a thundering torrent that felt more like a manic fortress of water, aimed straight at my skull. The roar of it was deafening, a ceaseless percussion that hammered against my shoulders and threatened to send me sprawling into the churning pool below. My teeth wouldn't stop chattering. My spine ached from bracing against the onslaught, and my spirit felt like it was being crushed under the endless cascade. According to Master Li, I wasn't allowed to leave until I realized it. In a moment of naive desperation, I'd asked him what it meant, hoping for a crisp definition, some neat puzzle to solve. His answer? You'll know when you know. Brilliant, profound, and about as helpful as a locked door without a key. So, there I perched, half frozen under a waterfall from hell, each droplet pummeling me like a fistful of iron pellets. Time stretched in an endless now, the hours merging into a gray haze. My mind felt like it was stuffed with soaking cotton. I clung to one single thought to keep me from succumbing to the punishing cold. How do I make God Flash truly mine? Nothing about this was glamorous or heroic. The water hammered me from above, goosebumps rippling across my skin, reminding me how fragile a human body can be in the face of nature's relentless force. My breath came in shallow gasps, chest locked in a frigid vice. The moment I let my focus slip, the waterfall threatened to send me headlong into the swirling pool. Yet I remained because for better or worse, I believed there was something down this path, something intangible I needed to find. It's not about speed, I murmured through numb lips, my voice promptly drowned by the waterfall's roar. Not just about light mana either. It's about a single, perfect moment. A reason. Yet the words felt hollow, like lines from a script I'd rehearsed too many times. Intent, focus, single motion, these had all become catchphrases, repeated so often that they lost their meaning. I tried to conjure images. The brilliance of a star slicing through the dark, the edge of a blade cleaving the horizon, the unstoppable push of my will. But each image crumbled away under the water's relentless pounding, leaving me with half-formed ideas that dissipated as fast as they arose. I found my thoughts drifting inevitably to Lucifer, the original creator of God Flash in the novel. He hadn't gained it by quiet reflection or waterfall meditation. He'd earned it in the crucible of battle, forging it under the heat of necessity and brilliance. That was the difference, wasn't it? Necessity. He created it because he had to, because at that moment there was no alternative. So what drove me? Necessity or convenience? Did I truly need to shape God Flash into a grade 6 art? Or was I just chasing a storyline that wasn't really mine? A fresh wave of water slammed against my neck, making me gasp as I refocused on staying upright. The waterfall felt like an extension of Master Li's lessons. Merciless, unyielding. Perhaps that was the entire point. To beat my mind into stillness until something genuine emerged. I forced my eyes shut, letting the brutal cold become a sort of meditative anchor. No matter how my thoughts spun, the water provided a reality check, a tangible impetus to keep me grounded. Gradually, the roar receded from my conscious awareness. My mind slipped into a slower rhythm. My body ached, but in that pain, I found a fragile clarity. I pictured God Flash in its earliest form, Lucifer executing it with unstoppable confidence, his blazing arcs of lightning unstoppable. In my version, I'd replaced that lightning with light mana, but it remained an imitation, a shell. So what was I missing? The why. A technique of that caliber wasn't about raw stats or arcane geometry. It was about the reason you moved, the conviction behind the blade, the undeniable intention that made the motion inevitable. A single, perfect instant of will. God Flash soared beyond a mere demonstration of speed or brilliance. It was a testament to need, to a moment when the swordsman's entire being demanded the move exist. And so, here I was pinned under a killer waterfall to discover my need. Because Lucifer's reasons were never mine. My need couldn't be cribbed from the novel's pages. I had to find my own impetus, my own reason to shape the moment into a new grade 6 art. Time slurred again, the hours morphing into a singular, punishing blur. My teeth chattered uncontrollably now, limbs close to numb. The constant barrage on my spine felt like each drop was a tiny hammer. My mind swam in circles, The fleeting clarity I'd grasped kept slipping away, replaced by a creeping despair. What if I can't do it? What if Lucifer was always meant to have it, and I'm just a thief who can't harness it fully? Eventually, my eyes drifted shut, more from overwhelming fatigue than deliberate choice. The cacophony dulled, as if I floated somewhere deeper inside. The cold, the pain, the tension. None of it vanished, but for a moment, it all felt quieter, like my heart had found a slower rhythm amid the storm. Arthur. The voice sliced through that half-dream state with alarming clarity, like a blade through mist. My eyes snapped open, disoriented. The waterfall roared on, but my hearing felt dulled. My mind spun, uncertain of reality. Then I glimpsed her silhouette near the edge of the crashing water. Serafina. She stood just beyond the waterfall's direct onslaught, the arcs of water spraying against her arms. Arthur, it's dark, she said, her words cutting through the noise. You've been here all day. Confusion flashed in my mind. Was it night already? My body felt so battered I'd lost track of the sun's position hours ago. You need to stop, she insisted, stepping closer, the swirling mists soaking her coat. Her usual calm voice carried an undertone of exasperation. Come back to the sect and rest. I blinked slowly, trying to piece my scrambled thoughts together. The bone-deep cold told me I was well past my limit. And yet, a stubborn flicker of defiance lit in my chest. What if the revelation was just a moment away? But the truth was stark. I was on the edge of collapse. Pushing further might break me before I discovered anything meaningful. Reluctantly, I gave a faint nod. My trembling arms uncoiled from my sides. The moment I tried to stand, pain knifed through my lower back, and my legs wobbled precariously on the slick rock. I pitched forward, half blinded by swirling water, until Serafina caught my shoulder with a steady hand. She cursed under her breath, a rare show of frustration. You're an idiot, she muttered, voice quavering with a mix of anger and concern. Staying out here so long, you'll freeze or drown or both. I managed a shivering laugh. I lost track of time. She let out a huff that might have been amusement or annoyance. Clearly, her grip on my arm was firm but careful, guiding me off the rock. I nearly tripped at the final step, the force of the waterfall still tugging at me, but Serafina yanked me back from the edge. Once out of the waterfall's direct fury, the cold air hit me differently, sending violent shudders through my body. My mind felt hazy, eyelids heavy, but a small spark lingered inside me. Something had stirred under that onslaught, a flicker of comprehension about forging God flash anew. Not a full revelation, not a triumphant eureka, but a seed that might grow. Serafina, noticing my distant gaze, frowned. Don't tell me you're still fixated on that technique in this condition, she snapped, though the softness in her eyes belied her harsh tone. Come on, let's get you warmed up before you destroy yourself. Chapter 143. It was a pleasant night, a pleasant full moon night, the kind that poets might write sonnets about and painters might ruin by trying too hard. The moon hung fat and luminous in the sky, spilling its light over Mount Hua like a generous drunk with a bottle of the good stuff. Lee sipped his tea, a slow, deliberate gesture that mirrored the steady rhythm of his thoughts. The droplet of tea bloomed on his tongue, the intricate flavor unfolding like a delicate manna-infused flower. Plum blossom tea, Mount Hua's signature blend, brewed from leaves so rare they could bankrupt small nations if auctioned. He savored it, not just the tea but the quiet, a moment to himself, which predictably did not last. Uncle! Serafina's voice cut through the serenity like a blade through silk. The door slid open with a sharp snap, and she marched in, arms folded, her silver hair catching the moonlight as it fanned behind her. Sarah? Lee greeted her with a soft smile, entirely unbothered by the intrusion. He placed his cup down with care, as if acknowledging her arrival didn't mean abandoning his tea. Why are you bullying Arthur? She demanded, her gaze as sharp as her tone. Lee raised an eyebrow, tilting his head in that maddeningly calm way he always did. I'm not bullying him. You sent him to waterfall training for an entire day, she countered, her arms folding tighter. If that's not bullying, I don't know what is. Lee chuckled, a deep warm sound that filled the room like a rolling wave. Sarah, bullying is when someone does something with malicious intent. What I'm doing is mentorship. Mentorship? Serafina echoed, her tone dripping with skepticism. He's sitting under freezing water for hours. That's not mentorship, That's borderline torture. Lee delicately set his teacup down, his movements precise and unhurried, as though the conversation required no urgency. He studied her for a moment, his gaze softening. "You've changed," he said, his voice contemplative. "What?" Serafina blinked, the accusation catching her off guard. "You've changed," he repeated. "You're standing here arguing with me, not because you disagree with my methods but because you're worried about him." Her expression wavered for a fraction of a second before she steeled herself. "I'm not worried." Lee's smile grew wider, a knowing glint in his dark eyes. "You like him, don't you?" "I don't," she shot back, the reply so quick it practically tripped over itself. Lee's laugh was a deep rumble, rich with amusement. "Sarah, you're a terrible liar. But don't worry. I'm not one to meddle in the affairs of young lovebirds." Serafina sputtered, her cheeks darkening slightly. "That's not the point. And I don't like him." "Of course not," Lee said smoothly, though his tone said otherwise. He picked up his teacup again, taking another slow sip as Serafina glared daggers at him. "But I'm still asking," she pressed, her voice sharp. "Why are you making him go through that? Surely there's a better way." Lee sighed, setting his tea down again with a quiet clink. His gaze grew distant for a moment, as though he were looking past her, past the room, into some distant memory or thought. "When I met him," Lee began, "I realized something. His talent, in terms of pure absorption and purification of mana, it's much lower than yours." Serafina frowned, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. "That's not possible," she murmured almost to herself. "He's a high silver ranker, and he reached that before I did." "Exactly," Lee nodded, the movement slow and deliberate. "And there's only one way that's possible. He's the kind of genius who becomes a diamond under pressure. The type who thrives on desperation, on adversity. For someone like him, a perfect, safe environment is wasted. He doesn't grow in the sunlight. He grows in the storm." Serafina's eyes narrowed. "And this storm is necessary because he won't form a grade 6 art the normal way," Lee said simply. "He doesn't need protection. He needs resistance. He needs to fight, to struggle, to be pushed past what he thinks he can endure. That's where his talent shines. If I coddle him, if I make it easy, he'll never reach the heights he's capable of. He'll never realize what he's truly made of." Serafina's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression thoughtful. "And you're sure that's the only way?" Lee smiled again, softer this time. "It's not about what's easiest, Sarah. It's about what's right. For him, this is right. Trust me on that." She exhaled sharply, her gaze dropping for a moment before she met his eyes again. "Fine. But if I find out you're pushing him too hard, you'll come storming into my room again, no doubt," Lee interrupted, his grin widening. "Don't worry, Sarah. I'm not trying to break him. I'm trying to make him unbreakable." Lee watched Serafina leave, her silver hair catching the moonlight in a way that made her look almost ethereal. "Don't hurt him," she'd said, folding her arms like a stern schoolmaster reprimanding a student. Lee chuckled softly to himself as he gazed out the open window, the night air cool against his skin. The moon hung heavy and luminous in the sky, casting its silver glow over Mount Hua's peaks. "I would never hurt a genius, Sarah," he murmured to the night. His words, though quiet, carried weight. "But sometimes, to forge a blade that sharp, you have to temper it in fire and ice." The second day of waterfall training began much like the first, with me questioning my life choices. I sat beneath the crushing torrent of water, the sheer force of it pressing down on me like the weight of a collapsing building. Each droplet felt like a hammer, and the sound of the waterfall was deafening, an endless roar that drowned out everything else. My body ached in places I didn't even know could ache, and my mind felt like it was teetering on the edge of collapse. According to Master Lee, this was where I was supposed to find clarity. Somewhere in the chaos, the noise, the sheer discomfort, was an epiphany waiting to be grasped. Epiphany, conceptualization, application. A neat little process on paper. In practice, It felt like trying to catch a slippery fish with bare hands while blindfolded. The problem wasn't the waterfall itself, it was my own mind. Thoughts swirled in my head like the water crashing around me. I replayed every battle, every mistake, every fleeting moment of insight. Godflash, the technique I wanted to evolve. The technique that wasn't truly mine yet. I needed to make it mine. Not Lucifer's, not a relic of someone else's imagination, but something that resonated with me. Something born from my own struggles, my own vision. But how? Reimagine it? I muttered to myself, though the words were swallowed by the roar of the water. Easier said than done. Every time I tried to picture the technique, it came back to me as it had always been, Lucifer's creation, reworked slightly with light mana but still fundamentally his. My hands clenched into fists, the cold water biting into my skin. I could feel frustration building in my chest, a tight knot that refused to loosen. How was I supposed to reimagine something when every frame of it was burned into my memory? Focus, I told myself. Strip it down. What is Godflash at its core? Speed, precision, devastation. A movement so fast it transcended sight, so precise it left no room for error, so devastating it ended battles in an instant. That was the essence of it. But what did that mean to me? What was my interpretation of speed, precision, devastation? I closed my eyes, trying to block out the cold, the noise, the ache in my muscles. Images flickered in my mind. Moments from the past, from battles, from training. The feeling of light mana coursing through me, sharp and radiant. The exhilaration of pushing past my limits. The moment in the fight against Arkel where I stepped into the jaws of death and came out alive. That was it. That was the feeling I needed to capture. Not just speed, but the courage to move forward when every instinct screamed at you to stop. Not just precision, but the clarity of knowing that one perfect strike could change everything. Not just devastation, but the will to stand against overwhelming odds and carve out a path with your own hands. I opened my eyes, the water blurring my vision. I was close. I could feel it, just out of reach, like the faint glow of a distant star. But no matter how hard I tried to grasp it, it slipped through my fingers. I exhaled, the breath shaky and uneven. The cold was starting to seep into my bones now, a dull ache that refused to be ignored. My hands trembled, not from fear or exhaustion, but from the sheer effort of holding on. And then I heard her voice. Arthur. It cut through the roar of the waterfall like a blade, sharp and clear. My head snapped up, my vision still hazy from the water, and I blinked rapidly to clear my eyes. Arthur? Seraphina's voice came again, closer this time, laced with a rare note of concern. I looked at her, and the sight of her made me gasp. Chapter 144. Seraphina was sitting at the very edge of the cliff, her legs dangling lazily above the churning waters below. The moonlight bathed her in silver, accentuating every curve, every strand of her ethereal hair that shimmered like spun moonlight. And then there was her swimsuit, a simple bikini that somehow managed to seem regal on her, as if the very concept of swimwear had been invented just for her use. I froze mid-step. My brain short-circuited. For the first time in a long while, I genuinely questioned the legality of something. Because surely looking this good in front of me of all people, had to break some sort of natural law. Her presence was disarming. I'd grown used to being around beautiful people. Rachel and Cecilia weren't exactly slouches in the looks department. But Seraphina wasn't just beautiful. She was otherworldly. The kind of beauty that knocked the air out of your lungs and left you wondering how the hell the universe had sculpted such a person. And the worst part? She was completely unaware of it. You're staring, she said without even glancing my way, her voice cool and unbothered, but her head tilted ever so slightly to catch me in the corner of her gaze. My face heated instantly. I turned away so fast it was a miracle I didn't give myself whiplash. I wasn't staring. I heard her soft chuckle, and when I dared to look again, I caught the faintest pink on her cheeks. Seraphina Zenith. Blushing. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I'd witnessed something that no mortal ever had before. You're staring again, I said, trying to wrestle some semblance of control back into the conversation. So what? She replied, entirely unfazed. Her eyes didn't leave mine, though there was a tiny smirk playing on her lips. What are you going to do about it? I gave up. There was no winning here. With a sigh, I jumped down from my perch under the waterfall, using a soft burst of wind magic to guide my fall. I landed next to her as lightly as I could manage, though the uneven ground still made me stumble slightly. Serafina, of course, didn't even flinch. So, I began, sitting beside her and letting my legs dangle into the abyss below. Did the Princess of Mount Hua fancy a swim tonight? Perhaps, she said, her tone as elusive as ever. In water that cold? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She turned her head slightly, her silver hair catching the moonlight in a way that almost made me forget what I'd asked. I'm a half-elf, Arthur, she said simply. My mother was the princess of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. I'm more used to the cold than you'll ever be. All right, that made sense. Mount Hua was already cold, but the water from this waterfall? It was liquid frostbite. To her, though, it probably felt like a mildly refreshing bath. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the waterfall roaring in the background. The moon hung heavy and luminous above us, casting the entire cliffside in shades of silver and gray. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost unreal. Why are you pushing yourself so hard? She asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Her voice was softer than usual, almost tentative. Because I need to, I replied automatically, my gaze fixed on the distant horizon. Arthur. Her tone sharpened, and I felt her shift beside me. Before I could react, she leaned in close. Too close. Her face was just inches from mine, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. I instinctively leaned back, though there was nowhere to go. Serafina? I stammered, my voice cracking slightly. Her scent hit me then, warm and sweet, like honey on a summer morning. It was a smell I'd noticed before, faintly lingering around her. But here, with her so close, it was overwhelming, distracting. Tell me, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I want to know. I swallowed hard. Her eyes were so piercing, so unrelenting, that for a moment, I felt like she could see right through me. My heart pounded in my chest, loud enough that I was sure she could hear it. Serafina, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. See, can we, maybe establish some boundaries here? She blinked, as if just realizing how close she was, and leaned back to her original position. Her face betrayed nothing, but I thought I caught the faintest twitch of amusement at the corner of her lips. You get flustered too easily, she remarked, brushing a strand of silver hair over her shoulder. Well, forgive me for being human, I muttered under my breath, though the heat in my cheeks probably ruined whatever dignity I had left. She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed once more on the moonlit horizon. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but charged with something I couldn't quite name. Arthur, she said eventually, her voice softer now, almost contemplative. Why do you push yourself so hard? Really? I glanced at her, unsure how to answer. But then I saw her expression. Not cold, not distant, but genuine. For the first time, it felt like she wasn't asking because she was curious, or because she felt obligated. She was asking because she cared. I don't know, I admitted finally, my voice low. Maybe because I feel like I have to. Like if I don't, I'll fall behind. Or worse, I'll lose something I can't get back. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't quite place. Then slowly she nodded. I see, she said quietly, her voice carrying an unfamiliar softness, like the edge of a blade wrapped in silk. Then, without warning, she added, So you're a crazy bastard. I blinked, caught off guard by her choice of words. I'd prefer you didn't call me that. Crazy bastard, she repeated, almost as if testing how it sounded in the air. Her ice-blue eyes narrowed, and she folded her arms like a disapproving elder sister. I don't care how crazy you are, Arthur. Stop hurting yourself. Her words struck harder than I expected, heavier than the waterfall that had battered me all day. There was no mocking edge, no detached curiosity. Just something raw and unfiltered, something almost protective. I turned to face her, unsure how to respond. I'm not. Don't lie. She cut me off, her tone sharp enough to slice through steel. You think I don't see it? The way you throw yourself at danger, the way you push past your limits like they don't exist. Do you think that makes you strong? It's necessary, I said, a bit more defensively than I intended. It's reckless, she snapped, leaning forward, her silver hair catching the moonlight like molten mercury. You're chasing strength like it's the only thing that matters. But what happens when you break yourself in the process? What good is your strength then? Her words were blunt, cutting, but beneath them I caught something else. A quiet fear, buried deep but undeniably there. It was strange, hearing that from someone like Serafina, who carried herself like nothing in the world could shake her. I didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, I was speechless. "Become as strong as you want," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But don't hurt yourself to get there. As long as you're not hurt, I don't care." The weight of her words settled over me, heavy and unyielding. I opened my mouth to respond, but she spoke again, her tone softer now, almost contemplative. "You're trying too hard to force it," she said, her gaze drifting to the waterfall. "That's why you haven't figured it out yet." "Figured what out?" I asked, my brow furrowing. She turned to look at me, her ice-blue eyes piercing in their clarity. "Your art, God Flash or whatever you're trying to make it into. You're treating it like a puzzle you can brute force your way through. But a grade 6 art isn't something you can force." I frowned, her words both frustrating and intriguing. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit around and wait for it to magically come together?" "No," she said simply. "You need to stop fighting it. You're thinking about it like it's a spell, like it has to follow strict rules. But a grade 6 art isn't just a technique, Arthur. It's an expression, a manifestation of who you are, not just what you can do." Her words hit me like a freight train. She wasn't wrong. I had been treating God Flash like a problem to be solved, a formula to be perfected. But an art wasn't a formula. It was something more, something deeper. Expression, I muttered under my breath, the word lingering in my mind like an echo. She nodded, her gaze steady. "You're trying to make it perfect. But perfection doesn't come from logic or calculations. It comes from feeling. Feeling. The word resonated in my mind, stirring something deep within me. I thought back to the moments when God Flash had felt most natural, most alive. It wasn't when I was overthinking it, breaking it down into steps. It was when I let go, when I trusted myself, my instincts, my sword. "You need to stop chasing the art," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "Let it come to you. Let it breathe. Let it breathe." The pieces didn't just click into place. They snapped together with the clarity of a lightning strike. My thoughts, my instincts, my experiences. They all converged into a single, undeniable truth. My chest tightened, but not with tension. It was a thrill that surged through me, electric and all-consuming. I understood now, not just the art but the why of it, why it had always felt incomplete, why it didn't fully resonate with me before. It wasn't just about speed or precision or power. It was about me, about my journey, my choices, my will to carve out something uniquely mine. I closed my eyes, the waterfall's relentless torrent now a backdrop to the clarity roaring in my mind. God Flash wasn't just a technique. It was an extension of me. A moment that defied hesitation, that thrived on instinct and trust. It was a declaration, a challenge, a refusal to falter, even in the face of overwhelming odds. When I opened my eyes, they burned with purpose. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, resolute. Serafina blinked at me, her cheeks still tinged with the faintest pink. "For what?" "For this?" I said, gesturing vaguely at the waterfall, the stars and her. "All of it. For being here. For saying what I needed to hear." She crossed her arms, her gaze flickering between amusement and embarrassment. "Just don't make me regret helping you, crazy bastard." I chuckled, but it was different now. Lighter. Freed. "You won't." Because I knew. The road ahead wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. If a grade 6 art was an expression of self, then this was my truth. Not Lucifer's. Not anyone else's.
Mine.
And it always would be. Chapter 145. The Wall of Talent. It was the immutable truth of the world, a silent executioner that spared no one, no matter how hard they worked or how fiercely they dreamed. Talent was the dividing line, the chasm that separated the great from the ordinary, the destined from the forgotten. Lee Zenith knew this better than most. He'd lived it. He'd seen it. When he was young, he'd watched his twin brother leap ahead of him with infuriating ease, carving paths that Lee could only stumble through despite putting in double the hours, double the effort. That was the first lesson. The second came with the Martial King. Lee had been there, his brother standing tall and proud, wielding the sword style that was their family's pride. And then, the Martial King had crushed it underfoot like a handful of fragile plum blossoms. His brother's pride, their family's legacy, trampled to dust. The third lesson came years later, with son Zenith, the golden prodigy who had arrived at the sect like the first ray of dawn piercing the cold night. A boy who seemed to take the world in his stride, bending it to his will with a smile that said, "This is easy." Lee thought he'd seen it all. He thought he'd made his peace with the wall, with the brutal truth of talent and its unforgiving nature. And then the world surprised him again. "Master, I did it!" Arthur's voice rang out, cutting through the roar of the waterfall. The light mana that had coiled around him dissipated into the air, leaving him standing there, soaked to the bone but radiating a quiet, startling triumph. Lee's breath caught. He felt his heart begin to pound, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. It wasn't the exhilaration of pride or even awe, it was fear. Cold, creeping fear. Talent. No, this wasn't just talent. This was something far more terrifying. Lee's hands trembled as he stared at the boy before him. He tried to clench his fist, to steady himself, but the tremor refused to subside. In 3 days, that was all it had taken. Arthur Nightingale had taken a 5-circle spell, an already absurd feat of casting, and transformed it into the first movement of a grade 6 art. Not copied, not mimicked, created, personalized, made his. Lee Zenith's mouth was dry. He didn't trust himself to speak. His mind was a storm of disbelief, confusion, and the faint whisper of dread. This wasn't normal. This wasn't natural. He'd thought he understood the boy's talent when he saw him wield light and dark mana, when he saw him form both the Black Star and the White Star. But this was beyond his understanding, beyond anything he'd ever witnessed. The prophecy. The words came to him unbidden, crawling out of the recesses of his memory like a serpent. The second hero, the destined figure who would rise, eclipsing all others, to reshape the world. The sect had debated it for years. Some said it was Sun Zenith, their golden prodigy. Others argued for Rinkagu, whose potential defied comprehension. But most had pinned their hopes and their fears on Lucifer Windward, the boy whose monstrous talent made even the greatest tremble. But now, as Lee stood there, his hand shaking, his eyes fixed on the boy before him, a thought clawed its way to the surface. What if we were wrong? Arthur looked up at him, his expression calm but filled with a quiet fire. He wasn't boastful. He wasn't arrogant. He didn't need to be. The proof was in the air around him, in the hum of mana still resonating from his body. "Master," Arthur asked, his voice cutting through Lee's spiraling thoughts. "Is something wrong?" Lee swallowed, his throat dry. For a moment he couldn't speak. And when he finally did, his voice was quieter than he intended, almost reverent. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Nothing's wrong. You've surpassed every expectation." Arthur tilted his head, clearly confused. "Is that bad?" Lee almost laughed, but it came out more like a shaky exhale. "No," he said again, firmer this time. "It's not bad. It's terrifying." Arthur blinked, but Lee didn't elaborate. He couldn't. The words felt too heavy to voice, the implications too vast to consider. All he could think was that the Sovereign's tournament was fast approaching. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what the outcome would be. The answer would come in the arena. Of that, he was certain. But as he looked at Arthur, standing there with the faint glow of light mana still clinging to him, Lee Zenith couldn't shake the thought that the prophecy had just taken an unexpected turn. "All right, you may have completed this, but you're not off the hook just yet," Lee said, his grin carrying the distinct air of a man about to drop something arduous into my lap. "You've still got a few days here, so I want to teach you something else. Something I think will suit you perfectly." "What is it?" I asked, already wary. Lee's enthusiasm usually meant sweat, tears, and occasionally, questioning my life choices. "The grade 3 art illusion sword," he said, leaning back as if waiting for my reaction. I blinked. "Why?" Lee raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by my lack of enthusiasm. "All right, let me explain, genius," he began, his voice taking on the tone of a patient schoolteacher trying to educate a particularly slow student. "Your talent is grade 6. That means anything below grade 6 will come to you faster, smoother. A grade 3 art? You'll breeze through it. At least, compared to anyone else. He paused, letting the words settle. But here's the real kicker. Once you reach the zenith realm of mastery in an art like this, it stops being a card you can pull out of your sleeve. It becomes woven into the very fabric of your swordsmanship. Every stroke, every thrust, every movement of your blade will carry its essence. In short, you won't just be using illusion sword, you'll become it. That caught my attention. Lee's grin widened as he continued, clearly noticing the shift in my expression. The beauty of illusion sword lies in its simplicity. It focuses on creating multiple overlapping mana flows, a technique designed to confuse your enemies. Feints on feints, layers upon layers. The moment someone tries to read your mana flow to anticipate your attack, they're lost. The real strike lands before they even realize they've been fooled. I frowned, the gears in my mind turning. If it's so straightforward, why is it classified as a grade 3 art? Surely it has some catch. Lee's grin turned wolfish. Ah, there it is, the catch. He tapped the hilt of his sword meaningfully. The art is straightforward in concept, but mastering it? That's another beast entirely. It demands exceptional expertise in feints and precision control over mana flow. Most swordsmen struggle to make the technique convincing, let alone seamless. That's why it sits comfortably in the grade 3 bracket. Not because it's easy, but because its impact is capped without mastery. I nodded slowly. The explanation made sense. The grades of martial arts weren't just about their effects in battle. They were also about the time, effort, and raw talent required to master them. A grade 5 art could take years to perfect, while a grade 4 art might be mastered in under a year with sufficient dedication. A grade 3 art, for someone like me? Months at most. I could probably master it in 6 weeks, I mused aloud, calculating the time based on my current level of swordsmanship. The rainforest training I'd endured, brutal and unrelenting, had honed my instincts to a razor's edge. Illusion sword would still be a challenge, but not an insurmountable one.
Linudda approvingly.
Exactly. 6 weeks, give or take. And that's why this is perfect for you. While you're refining your new grade 6 movement, this will work in tandem to enhance your base swordsmanship. It's not just about adding another trick to your repertoire. It's about making your swordplay unpredictable on a fundamental level. I frowned, trying to envision how illusion sword would fit into my overall style. My current approach relied heavily on precision and overwhelming power, but unpredictability. That was something I lacked. And in a world where fights were won and lost in the space of a single breath, the ability to deceive was invaluable. Lee leaned forward, his gaze intense. This isn't just about utility, Arthur. It's about laying the groundwork for what's to come. If you want to create a grade 6 art, your swordsmanship needs to evolve. You need layers, depth. Illusion sword will give you that. His words struck a chord. The path to greatness wasn't just about raw talent or brute force. It was about growth, adaptation, and understanding. And this felt like the next step. All right, I said, meeting his gaze with renewed determination. Let's do it. Chapter 146. I spent the remaining days in Mount Hua catching up on the homework I had barely glanced at before, trading conversations with Serafina that were increasingly less frosty, at least from her side, and pouring myself into learning illusion sword. Time, as it often does when one's hands are full, slipped by without notice, and soon it was time to leave. Standing before Master Li on the morning of our departure, I bowed deeply, my words sincere. Thank you for your teachings, Master. I'll carry everything you taught me with me. Master Li gave me one of his rare, warm smiles. The kind that made you believe, for a fleeting moment, that he wasn't the same man who had subjected you to waterfall training for hours on end. You're my first and only disciple, Arthur. Don't put shame on my name. And make me proud in the Sovereign's tournament. I'll be watching. I won't let you down, I said, the weight of his words settling over me like a mantle. Then, in a move so characteristic of him it bordered on predictable, he leaned in conspiratorially. And take care of Serafina, all right? She might be cold and blunt, but she cares about you, even if she pretends not to. Uncle! Serafina's foot shot out in a now-practiced motion, catching his shin with a satisfying thud. Lee grinned, seemingly impervious to her rebuke, while I struggled to hold back a laugh. I know she does, I said, my voice carrying more weight than I intended. I looked at Serafina and added, I'll take care of her. She stared at me for a moment, her ice-blue eyes unreadable, before turning away with an almost imperceptible huff. Without another word, we climbed into the car waiting to take us down the mountain. The journey back mirrored the one that had brought us to Mount Hua, familiar, yet different. A flight, 2 warp gates, and then the increasingly familiar sight of Mythos Academy, perched on its isolated island like a fortress of learning. The transitions felt smoother this time, less like disjointed leaps and more like a natural progression. Or maybe I was just eager to get back. As we neared the academy, Serafina broke the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "I hope your visit to Mount Hua met your expectations," she said, her voice calm but with an undertone of curiosity. "It did," I said, turning to face her, "though I didn't get to meet many people there. Your uncle was really the only one I interacted with." Her expression softened slightly. "That was intentional. You're not an official disciple of Mount Hua. You don't practice our sex arts. If you had met others, there might have been complications." "Complications?" I raised an eyebrow. "Envy?" she said simply, as though that explained everything. And it did, really. I blinked at her, genuinely surprised by her foresight. "You thought that far ahead?" She turned her head away, her silver hair catching the light in a way that made it look almost luminescent. "I didn't want you to deal with anything unnecessary." "Thanks, Sarah," I said, the nickname slipping out before I could think twice. "I'm glad I came." She turned back to me, her head tilting slightly. "Sarah. Can I call you that?" I asked, scratching the back of my neck. I wasn't sure why I felt nervous about it. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, barely there but unmistakable. "If it pleases you." It did, more than I cared to admit. By the time we reached the academy, the sun had dipped low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of orange and pink. The warp gate left us just outside the sprawling grounds, and the sight of the familiar architecture, the sleek lines and towering spires, brought a strange sense of relief. As much as I'd gained from Mount Hua, there was something comforting about returning to the place where it all began. "Back to the grindstone, huh?" Luna's voice echoed in my mind, the first time she'd spoken since we left Mount Hua. "You've been quiet lately?" I replied, mentally shrugging as we walked through the gates. "I'm not much help when it comes to swordsmanship," she said. "Besides, I figured you needed the silence to focus. But now that we're back, let's talk about the real elephant in the room. White rank. You're close, aren't you?" "Very close," I admitted. As Serafina and I reached the Ophelia dorm, she turned to me, her gaze steady. "Train hard. The Sovereign's tournament isn't far off. I don't expect you to embarrass Mount Hua." I grinned. "I wouldn't dare." She nodded once, her usual composed self, before disappearing into her floor. I watched her go, feeling the weight of her words settle alongside the expectations of everyone else I'd encountered recently. White rank. A grade 6 art. The Lich. The Sovereign's tournament. Everything was falling into place. Not entirely there yet, mind you. The pieces weren't aligned perfectly, but I could feel the shape of it now. Like the hum of a string instrument tuned just a hair too tight. The tension was almost unbearable, but the music it promised to unleash was tantalizing. Ever since that moment, the epiphany that pulled the threads of my grade 6 art together, I'd felt the change within me. A shift so subtle at first, I'd mistaken it for exhaustion. But now, it roared like a storm held just beneath my skin. I was closer to white rank than ever, each breath feeling heavier with the weight of potential. The others wouldn't understand. Rachel might cheer me on, Cecilia would make some snarky remark about my sheer audacity. Rose would shake her head with that wry smile of hers, and Serafina, she'd just tilt her head and mutter, "Crazy bastard." As though it were both an insult and a compliment. They all saw parts of me, but none of them felt this. The sheer need to ascend, to purify, to push. By the time I reached my room, my chest was tight with anticipation. The door slid shut behind me with the soft hiss of modern hydraulics, sealing me into the quiet sanctuary. The room was stark, functional, but it was mine. And tonight, it would witness something extraordinary. I sat cross-legged on the mat in the center of the room, the familiar hum of mana flowing through my veins like a second pulse. My breathing slowed, each inhale drawing in the ambient mana around me, each exhale releasing impurities. My hands rested on my knees, palms up, as I focused inward. The core. My silver core shimmered faintly in the depths of my consciousness, encased in that thin, unyielding layer. The casing was a cage, and it had served its purpose, but it was time to break free. Time to ascend. I began the purification. The process was painstaking, like trying to filter light through a diamond. I pulled in mana layer by layer and pushed it through the core. Each cycle stripped away the imperfections, the impurities. It wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. Every fiber of my being had to be aligned or the process would fail. The casing resisted as it always did. It wasn't malevolent, just stubborn. Like the last stone in a river's path. I grit my teeth, my focus narrowing further. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, charged with an unseen energy. Sweat trickled down my temples as the resistance increased, the core pushing back against my will. But I wouldn't stop, couldn't. The room grew brighter, not from the artificial lighting, but from the glow emanating from within me. The silver core was reacting now, trembling under the weight of my mana, my resolve. It wasn't just about force, it was about precision. Each thread of mana had to be perfectly aligned, perfectly directed. The casing cracked. A soundless fracture echoed in my mind, and I gasped. The resistance wavered, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. I pushed harder, pouring everything into the process. My hands trembled, my body aching under the strain, but I refused to stop. Crack. The fracture deepened, light spilling through the cracks like the first rays of dawn piercing a storm. My heart pounded, the rhythm syncing with the pulsing glow of the core. This was it, the moment. The wall between silver and white was crumbling, and I was tearing through it. With a final surge of effort, the casing shattered. The light was blinding, a radiant explosion that filled my entire being. The silver core dissolved, replaced by a pristine, shining white core. It was smooth, flawless, and it hummed with a power that felt alien yet familiar. My breath caught in my throat as the weight of it settled within me, the purity of the mana coursing through my veins unlike anything I'd ever felt. I opened my eyes, the world around me sharper, clearer, more vivid than before. The air seemed lighter, the sounds crisper. I flexed my fingers, feeling the surge of power at my command. White rank. I was there. A laugh bubbled up unbidden, not of arrogance but of sheer relief. The journey to this point had been grueling, but standing, or rather sitting, on this new plateau, I knew it had been worth every moment. Chapter 147. Lich. The spring break had come to an end, and as I sprawled out on my bed, a wild grin stretched across my face. Satisfaction coursed through me, every inch of my body buzzing with the sheer accomplishment of the past weeks. The shining white core within me pulsed gently, a quiet reminder of the barrier I'd shattered. I had half a mind to head straight to the training grounds, eager to test the new power surging through me. The temptation gnawed at me like an itch, but I stopped myself at Luna's firm interjection. "Hey, idiot!" Her voice rang in my mind, sharp as ever. "Do you realize you've done it again?" "Done what?" I asked innocently, although deep down, I already had an inkling of what she was about to say. "You pushed yourself too far, too fast," she said, her tone carrying the weariness of someone forced to lecture a particularly stubborn child. "Do you even understand how reckless that was?" "I don't think it was that reckless," I countered, trying and failing to sound convincing. "I'm still in one piece, aren't I?" "Barely," she shot back. "You rushed to white rank way before your talent should have allowed it. You're lucky you didn't burn yourself out completely. You're talented, sure, but not that talented." Her words struck a chord. She wasn't wrong. The talent of this body, Arthur Nightingale, wasn't naturally suited for such rapid advancement. I had forced it, pushing through sheer desperation and grit, brushing shoulders with death itself to carve out this new strength. It was my modus operandi, but even I knew I was stretching the limits of what was sustainable. "We still had time," Luna continued, softer now but no less insistent. "Why rush like that? You weren't ready." I mulled over her question. Time. Yes, I had time. The Sovereign's tournament wasn't for another 2 months. On paper, there was no need to push myself so aggressively. And yet, something in me had felt the urgency, a shadow of unease that I couldn't quite explain, a sense that the world, ever unpredictable, would soon throw something new at me. "Call it instinct," I finally replied, though even I wasn't entirely sure what had driven me. Luna sighed, a long-suffering sound. "Instinct or not, just don't kill yourself before you actually get to prove anything. All right?" The next day, I made my way to class. The moment I stepped into the room, I felt the shift in atmosphere. 7 pairs of eyes locked onto me, their weight almost tangible. Class 1A, the best of Mythos Academy, all present before me. Ren's reaction was the most visible. His violet eyes widened, his fists clenching reflexively as he straightened in his seat. Rachel, on the other hand, looked at me with unabashed joy, her smile bright and warm. Cecilia's reaction was similar, though there was something more in her expression. A curious mix of pride and something else I couldn't quite place. Ian's golden eyes glimmered with interest, his usual composed demeanor breaking slightly as his head tilted ever so slightly. Jean, stoic as always, managed a flicker of surprise in his otherwise unreadable features. And then there was Lucifer. His verdant eyes narrowed, their piercing gaze sweeping over me like a scanner assessing a potential rival. He didn't speak, but the tension in his posture said everything. For the first time I was on his level, or at least that's how it seemed in terms of mana rank. White rank. The same rank he'd held as his unshakable badge of superiority. Until now. The silence was palpable, the room charged with an invisible current. It was Rachel who finally broke it. "Arthur," she said, her voice a mixture of excitement and disbelief. You reached white rank." Cecilia smirked, though her eyes betrayed her own surprise. "Of course he did. It's Arthur. Common sense has no place here." Before anyone else could chime in, the door hissed open. Professor Nero stepped inside, his sharp gaze sweeping over us with the precision of a hawk surveying its territory. As his eyes landed on me, they lingered just a fraction longer than usual, a flicker of surprise crossing his otherwise stoic features. But, true to form, he didn't comment on it. "Good to see everyone back," he said, his voice cutting cleanly through the room's tension. "I trust your spring breaks were productive." He didn't wait for a response, instead tapping on his hollow tablet. A 3D display materialized in front of him, showing a detailed schedule that loomed over the room like a harbinger of doom. "As you are all aware, we are now in the final stretch of the semester," Nero began. 2 months remain until the end-of-year festival, which will include the Sovereign's Tournament. A chance for you to prove your worth against the best Mythos has to offer. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath at the mention of the tournament. The Sovereign's Tournament was more than just an event. It was a battlefield, a stage where reputations were forged and legends born. Before that, however, Nero continued, you will have your written exams and must submit your respective end-of-year projects. Both are non-negotiable, so I suggest you manage your time wisely. His gaze swept across the room again, pausing momentarily on each of us as if weighing our potential. This is the final sprint. For those of you who aim to stand at the pinnacle, now is the time to prove it. The charged silence of the room hung heavy even as we were dismissed, like the lingering smell of ozone after a storm. As the others filed out, their murmurs about the upcoming Sovereign's Tournament fading into the corridor, I headed off to my next class. A class that had, over time, become my sanctuary of sorts. Necromancy. Stepping into the lab, I was greeted by the familiar, almost soothing sight of flickering holographic displays, shelves stacked with mana cores and runic texts, and the faint hum of containment fields housing all manner of dark magical artifacts. The room was a masterpiece of blending tradition and technology, a testament to Mythos Academy's prowess. Professor Gravemore was already there, his long fingers trailing over a floating projection of some intricate runic structure. At my entry, his gaze flicked up, and for the briefest moment, his usually stern face betrayed a flicker of surprise. His dark, hawk-like eyes narrowed as they swept over me, clearly assessing the changes in my mana signature. "White rank already?" he said, the faintest note of surprise in his gravelly voice. "Impressive, Arthur. Truly. Though not entirely unexpected, knowing you." "Thank you, Professor," I said with a polite bow, suppressing the urge to grin. His sharp eyes shifted past me as Jean walked in, his usual stoic expression intact. Professor Gravemore nodded at him, handing him a hollow slate loaded with assignments. "You, Jean, will work on these autonomous mana flow equations. They're rudimentary, so I expect nothing less than precision," Gravemore said before turning his full attention back to me. "You, however," he continued, his tone weightier now, "are here for something far more significant." He gestured toward the corner of the room, where a workstation glowed faintly, its display showing a list of materials alongside intricate runic diagrams. "The Lich," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a solemn promise. "You want to begin its construction, yes?" I nodded, the weight of the task pressing down on me. "Yes, Professor. I'm ready. Are you? Gravemore's sharp gaze pierced through me, as though searching for any trace of hesitation. You have the materials, the rank, and the ability. But assembling a lich isn't just a task of skill. It's a crucible. One misstep and the results could be catastrophic. Are you prepared for that? I swallowed hard but nodded again. I am. He studied me for a long moment before giving a curt nod of approval. Good. Then this weekend, I'll oversee the process personally. But make no mistake, Arthur, I won't be able to help much. The lich's creation hinges entirely on your Black Star's dark mana. Without it, the assembly simply cannot proceed. Thank you, Professor, I said, bowing deeply. He waved me off, stepping toward the workstation and beckoning me to follow. Come, let us revise everything before the undertaking. If you make even a single mistake, I'll ensure it doesn't cost you more than your pride. But that's as far as I can intervene. The rest is on you. I followed him to the glowing display, where the details of my materials and the lich's design were laid out in meticulous detail. The skeleton of the blood wyvern, the skull of the arch-lich, the basilisk heart as the source, and the Evernight staff. All of it gleamed with latent power, waiting to be unified into a singular, terrifying entity. First, Gravemore began, his voice taking on the cadence of a seasoned lecturer. The skeleton. It has already been mana-programmed to harmonize with the skull and the source. The runes inscribed upon it will act as the foundation of the lich's physical form. However, during the assembly, your dark mana will need to flow through it to activate the programming fully. Any deviation, and the entire structure could destabilize. I nodded, committing his words to memory. Next, the skull, he continued, pointing to the detailed diagram of the arch-lich's skull. The skull represents the mind. It will dictate the lich's intelligence, its capacity to reason and strategize. The programming we've added is robust, but you'll need to bind it to the source using your own mana. This is where the first major challenge lies. The synchronization must be perfect. Your mana will serve as the bridge between the mind and the soul. I leaned in closer, absorbing every word. Gravemore's voice was steady, authoritative, but not without a certain edge of caution. He knew the risks as well as I did. And finally, he said, his tone lowering slightly, the source, the basilisk heart. This is the soul of the lich, its core essence. While the programming has been partially completed to simplify the process, the true work begins when you pour your mana into it. The heart must be awakened, but in a controlled manner. If you lose control, he let the sentence hang, the unspoken consequences heavy in the air. I nodded grimly. I understand. Do you? Gravemore asked, his dark eyes locking onto mine. The basilisk heart is a tier above everything else in this assembly. Even with the limiters in place, its sheer power could overwhelm you. Your Black Star will be tested like never before. Do you truly understand what that means? I do, I said, my voice firm. And I'm ready. Gravemore's gaze softened, just slightly. Very well. Once the source is bound to the skull and the skeleton, the final step will be activating the staff. The Evernight staff will serve as the lich's anchor, tying together the mind, body, and soul. This will be the easiest step, but only if the previous stages are successful. Do you follow? Yes, Professor, I said, my confidence bolstered by his thorough explanation. Good, he said, his voice losing some of its edge. You've come far, Arthur. Farther than I expected, if I'm honest. But this weekend will be your greatest challenge yet. Do not underestimate it. I won't, I promised. He stepped back, folding his arms as he regarded me with something approaching pride. Then prepare yourself. Review the materials, refine your mana control, and rest while you can. The creation of a lich is no small feat, but if anyone can succeed, it's you. Chapter 148. The morning felt heavier than usual, not just because my spatial ring, now laden with every component for the lich ritual, pulled at my consciousness, reminding me of the monumental task ahead. No, the real weight sat coiled in my chest, a knot of tension that refused to unravel. Today I would attempt something colossal, something that even ascendant-rank necromancers would hesitate to try. And as prepared as I was, as meticulously as I'd planned, the enormity of my ambition pressed down on me like an immovable stone. I realized, with a pang of uncertainty, that I needed more than just confidence or resolve before I entered Professor Gravemore's lab. I needed the voices of the people who mattered most, the voices that could steady my feet on this precarious path. My first stop was the Academy Gardens, a sanctuary of winding paths, flowers nurtured under carefully tuned manalamps, and an air of quiet serenity. Rachel often spent her evenings here alone, reading or daydreaming beneath the sprawling magnolia tree that dominated one corner of the garden. The pale petals drifted lazily on the breeze, creating the impression of snow in mid-spring. I found her seated on a small wooden bench, a worn book in one hand and a delicate cup of tea in the other. The soft rustle of leaves provided a gentle background lullaby. As I approached, she glanced up, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. "Hey, Arthur," she greeted, a warm smile lighting her features. "You look like you've got something serious on your mind." I sat beside her, nerves dancing at the edge of my awareness. "I wanted to talk to you about today," I began, voice subdued. She set her tea aside, closing her book with a deliberate movement. "Today." There was a note of concern in her tone, but it was laced with empathy, with that unwavering warmth I'd come to depend on. I fiddled with my sleeve, inhaling slowly. "I'm making the lich, Ratch." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, though no trace of fear emerged. Instead, she simply placed her hand over mine, her eyes steady. "Arthur, you've spent months preparing for this," she said gently. "You're ready. You're more than ready." I swallowed hard, the tension in my chest slightly easing. "But what if I'm not? What if something goes wrong? I don't want to fail." Her grip tightened, and her gaze locked onto mine. "Then you try again," she said, as though it were the simplest truth in the world. "Because that's who you are. You don't stop, you don't give up, and it's one of many reasons you're precious to me." I blinked, a spark of gratitude igniting deep within. Somehow, hearing Rachel articulate that unwavering confidence in me lifted my spirits. "Thanks," I murmured. "It's good to hear you say that." Next on my list was Cecilia. I found her in one of the training halls, the faint hum of mana-laced contraptions underscoring her practice sessions. Her crimson hair was tied back, the ends brushing the collar of her academy jacket, and a thin film of sweat glistened on her brow. Each motion she made crackled with a raw edge of power, her practice spells weaving arcs of energy through the air. She caught sight of me lingering by the entrance. Her eyebrows lifted. "You look like you're about to do something incredibly stupid," she remarked dryly, never one to mince words. I exhaled, letting out a half-laugh. "I'm making the lich today." An unspoken tension settled in the hall, and for a moment, she seemed torn between scolding me or shaking her head in exasperation. Then she let out a rough sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. "Of course you are. Because why wouldn't Arthur Nightingale tackle something insane?" she said, voice steeped in a blend of annoyance and grudging respect. I hesitated, remembering how harsh she could be with her truths. I was hoping for some words of encouragement, something to remind me I'm not walking a total suicide path. Her gaze narrowed, and for a beat, I worried she'd simply scoff. Instead, she let out a sardonic laugh. "Encouragement, huh? Fine. Don't screw up," I groaned. "Come on, Cecilia. You can do better than that." She moved closer, and to my surprise, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "Look, you're a pain most of the time, but you're also the most annoyingly capable person I've met. If anyone can pull off a lich creation at your rank, it's you. Just don't let that ego blow it." Something about her bluntness was oddly comforting. Her version of support might be prickly, but it was genuine. "Thanks," I said, feeling a wry grin tug at my lips. "Anytime," she replied with a roll of her eyes. Then her smirk returned. "But if you do botch it, I'm charging double my usual fee for saving your sorry hide." "Deal," I said, the weight on my shoulders easing a bit more. I found Serafina near the academy grounds, beneath a cherry blossom tree that graced the outer courtyard. The petals drifted in soft pink clusters around her, a delicate contrast to her usual stoic posture. Her silver hair caught the afternoon sun, lending her an ethereal air. She turned her head slightly as I approached, as if sensing my presence before I spoke. "Arthur," she acknowledged, voice tinged with curiosity. "What do you need?" "I'm making the lich today," I said, stepping closer. The swirl of petals brushed across my feet. "I guess I just wanted to hear something from you first." For a beat, she remained silent, eyes flicking toward the drifting blooms. "You don't need my words. You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" The directness of her response gave me pause. but I pressed on. Maybe so, but I'd still like to hear them. It would mean something to me, Serafina. She faced me then, blue eyes cool yet not unkind. You're reckless, stubborn, and too confident for your own good, but you also make the impossible seem possible. It's infuriating. She paused, letting out a soft sigh. That's why you'll succeed. Not because you're flawless, but because you won't accept failure as an option. Her words, quiet as they were, sent warmth through my chest. Serafina, I began, unsure how to respond. A faint twitch of her lips might have been a smile. Don't make me regret believing in you, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. Thank you, I managed. I won't. Lastly, I found Rose at the Academy Cafe, stirring a cup of coffee with a bored expression. She arched an eyebrow as I settled into the chair opposite her. Arthur, you look like you're on a mission to gather last-minute pep talks.
Spill.
Couldn't help but chuckle. Rose never missed a beat. I'm making the lich today, I confessed. Just wanted to talk before I go. She set her spoon down, leaning back. You never fail to surprise me. Building a lich? Sure, why not? I'm half convinced you could juggle meltdown bombs and come out unscathed. I grimaced, but there was a fondness beneath her sarcasm. So, that's a you'll be fine from you? Obviously, she replied, rolling her eyes. You're insane, but you're also a genius. I'd be more shocked if you didn't succeed. Just do me a favor and remember all the times I helped you when you're some unstoppable necromancer with a pet lich. Okay? I snorted. How could I forget? She sipped her coffee, a grin dancing at the edges of her lips. Good. Now quit bothering me and go prove you're as amazing as I know you are. By the time I stepped into Professor Gravemore's lab, an echoing chamber brimming with dusty grimoires, archaic relics, and mana-driven apparatus, the knot in my chest felt lighter. The voices of my friends, mentors, and rivals echoed in my mind, each in their own way telling me the same truth. You can do this. And if I failed, I'd try again. Professor Gravemore stood at one of the tall counters, the faint hum of a complex device overshadowed by the hush in the lab. He glanced at me as I entered, taking in the slight edge of nerves in my posture. You're late, he said, though no real reprimand colored his words. You've memorized the sequence? Gravemore asked, glancing at me over his spectacles. I have, I replied, voice firm. I surveyed the arrangement, verifying the runes. Everything was in place. This was it. And you understand the risk? Gravemore continued, his gaze intense. If your will falters, if your calculations slip, the backlash could be catastrophic. You may lose more than just the lich components, you could lose your life or worse. A prickle of fear danced along my spine. Yes, I said quietly, but I'm prepared. The professor's eyes narrowed, evaluating me for any trace of doubt. Finding none, he stepped aside. Then proceed. Chapter 149. I exhaled, letting the tension ebb away for a moment. This was it. Months of preparation, of theory, of gathering impossible materials, all leading to this exact moment. Everything was in place. I had spent countless hours practicing the necessary mana threads, weaving them over and over again to connect the source, skull, and skeleton. I understood the theory, the mana programming, and every microscopic detail of the process like the back of my hand. Now, I had to put it all into action. On the table before me lay the culmination of those efforts. The scarlet blood wyvern skeleton, gleaming faintly under the laboratory lights, its ominous presence filling the room. This was no ordinary skeleton. It had been compressed and meticulously processed to serve as the foundation for my lich's body. Next to it, the skull of an arch-lich, etched with ancient, unreadable runes that seemed to hum with their own energy. A gift from King Alastair Creighton, Rachel's father. It practically radiated raw, terrifying power. And finally, there was the basilisk heart. It pulsed faintly, as though even in death, its essence refused to fully fade. This would form the lich's soul, the nexus of its very being. Everything I needed to create something few had ever dared to even dream of was here. The tools, the materials, the knowledge, and me. Now, I just had to bring it all together. No pressure. I inhaled deeply, activating lucent harmony. A tingling warmth spread through my arms as the glowing sigils of Luna's power emerged, wrapping around me like a second skin. My mana shifted, first turning to silver, bright and pure. Then, with a focused effort, I let it deepen, darken, twisting into the deep, rich black of my black star. My white star remained dormant, silent and still, as it had to be. The two could never work together, an immutable law of mana. Professor Gravemore stood to the side, arms crossed, his sharp eyes scrutinizing every move I made. He didn't say a word, waiting for me to take the first step. I reached for the blood of the mana beast that Vokert had provided. A viscous, crimson liquid that shimmered faintly with latent power. This blood wasn't just symbolic. It was the conductor for the mana threads that would bind the components together. I dipped my fingers into it and began tracing the summoning circle onto the table. The circle's design had been meticulously crafted by Vokert's finest necromancers. Complex sigils intertwined with delicate arcs and sharp angles, the geometry precise and unforgiving. Each stroke had to be perfect, each line imbued with just the right amount of mana. There was no room for error. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of my mana and the rhythmic drip of the blood as I worked. The sigils began to glow faintly as I completed each section, the circle coming alive under my hands. "Good," Professor Gravemore murmured, his voice low and steady. "The symmetry is perfect. Keep going." I didn't respond, too focused to speak. My fingers moved almost of their own accord, guided by instinct and precision as I completed the final sigil. The circle flared for a brief moment before settling into a steady, ominous glow. "Perfect," Professor Gravemore said, nodding in approval. "Now, move on to the skeleton." I exhaled, wiping the sweat from my brow. That was the easy part, I told myself. Now came the true challenge. I placed my hand on the blood wyvern skeleton, closing my eyes to better focus. The moment my mana made contact, I felt it. A dense, complex web of programming already inscribed into the bones by Vokert's necromancers. It was intricate, elegant, and perfectly aligned to serve as the body aspect of the lich. My job was to expand upon it, to add the necessary layers of programming to make it functional, to breathe the first semblance of life into it. The skeleton felt cold under my hand, an almost unnatural chill that seemed to seep into my very core. I concentrated, letting my mana flow along the pre-existing lines of programming, tracing them carefully. It was like walking a tightrope. One misstep, one miscalculation, and the entire structure could collapse. "Slowly," Professor Gravemore instructed, his voice steady. "Feel the flow of the programming. Understand it before you modify it." I nodded, though I didn't dare open my eyes. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to add my own lines of mana code. These weren't just random additions. They were carefully planned threads designed to enhance the skeleton's capacity, to allow it to integrate seamlessly with the source and skull later. Each thread had to be anchored perfectly, each connection aligned to the larger framework. It was like adding stitches to an impossibly complex tapestry, one that was already a masterpiece in its own right. Time seemed to blur as I worked. Minutes turned into hours, each moment filled with relentless focus. My mana reserves drained steadily, the strain beginning to weigh on me. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Finally, I placed the last thread, the mana code flaring briefly as it settled into place. I pulled my hand back, breathing heavily. The skeleton now shimmered faintly, the programming complete. For now. "Good work," Professor Gravemore said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You've finished the body aspect. That was the simplest part, but it was still no small feat. Take a break, Arthur. You've earned it." "Can I afford to?" I asked, my voice tinged with exhaustion. "You must," he replied firmly. "This process has to be completed within 50 hours. Yes, but you'll need your full strength for the source and skull. Your mana reserves are holding up well, but your mind is another matter entirely." I nodded reluctantly, stepping back from the table. He was right. My mind felt like it had run a marathon, the calculations and focus required for the skeleton taking their toll. Nearly a quarter of my reserves had been consumed already. I wouldn't have made it this far without reaching white rank, I thought grimly, the realization striking me. If I had tried this even a few weeks ago, I would have run out of mana long before completing the skeleton. I sank into a nearby chair, closing my eyes as I let my mind rest. The first step was complete, but the hardest work still lay ahead. After a much-needed rest, I returned to work. My next task was the mind aspect, infusing the Archlich's skull. The skull rested on the table, its surface faintly glinting under the lab's soft electric lighting. It was a dull, ivory-white object that radiated an unsettling aura, the kind of object you instinctively avoided looking at for too long. Ancient runes etched into its surface pulsed faintly, remnants of Vakart's initial programming. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I approached. My black star thrummed within me, an endless reservoir of dark mana waiting to be harnessed. Activating it, I allowed the threads of my dark mana to flow into my hands, tingling as it pooled at my fingertips. I placed my hands firmly on the skull's surface, feeling its inherent resistance. The vestiges of the arch-liches were lingering like stubborn shadows. "Start slow," Gravemore said, his voice low and reassuring. "This is where many necromancers falter. Let your mana settle. Don't overpower it." I nodded and closed my eyes, focusing. The initial resistance was strong, the skull testing me, its programming pushing back as though the arch-lich's ego still lurked within. But my mana wasn't just a foreign intruder. It was dominant. Slowly, methodically, I allowed my mana to seep into the existing lines of programming left by Vakart. Each rune, each line, each curve needed to be overlaid with my own mana, woven together to make the Lich's mind my creation, not a relic of the Arch-Lich's past. The process was like threading a needle while blindfolded. The skull resisted at every step, the programming lines twisting and shifting as if alive. My mind buzzed with the effort, my focus narrowing to the microscopic level as I traced each mana thread. It was maddeningly precise work, and my hands trembled as I pressed on, forcing the skull to accept my influence. "Good," Gravemore murmured, his tone encouraging. "It's reacting. You're overriding it." Minutes turned into hours. Sweat dripped from my temple, pooling on the table beneath me, but I didn't stop. Each successful thread was a small victory, and with every new line of programming, I could feel the skull bending to my will. When I finished overlaying Vakart's programming with my own, I moved to the next stage, adding new mana programming. This was where the real challenge began. Unlike the skeleton, where the programming was more structural, the skull's programming was deeply conceptual. It wasn't just about giving it commands, it was about defining its identity. The skull was the mind of the Lich, the core of its intelligence and decision-making. My programming had to be precise enough to create a functional thought process, yet restrictive enough to ensure the Lich didn't gain true sentience. Of course, this would only come together with the source. I worked meticulously, carving out commands and logical pathways with my mana threads. Each thread glowed faintly as it wove into the existing web of programming, creating something new, something uniquely mine. The skull began to hum softly, an eerie resonance that filled the lab. "Impressive," Gravemore commented. "It's accepting your programming more smoothly than I anticipated. Your control has improved." I allowed myself a small smile at the praise, though I didn't dare lose focus. The work was delicate, and a single mistake could unravel hours of progress. I poured everything into the task, my mind burning with the effort as I completed the final lines. When the last thread snapped into place, the skull went silent. The faint hum ceased, replaced by a stillness that felt almost contemplative. "It's done," I said, my voice hoarse. Gravemore stepped forward, examining the skull with a critical eye. "Remarkable," he muttered. "The flow is seamless. You've handled the mind aspect beautifully." I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to savor the small victory. But the respite was brief. My gaze drifted to the table, to the object resting at its center. The basilisk heart. Chapter 150. The basilisk heart sat on the table, its crimson surface glimmering faintly under the lab's lights. Golden veins traced intricate paths across it, pulsating in a slow, deliberate rhythm that reminded me of a beast's heartbeat, echoing from some forgotten era. It exuded a power that was both awe-inspiring and menacing, a living, breathing remnant of a mythic creature long since vanished from our mortal plane. I steeled myself, hands poised over the heart. This was the source, the very soul of my would-be Lich, and the apex of my research. The skeleton had been a lesson in exhaustion, a puzzle of sinew and bone that tested my patience. The skull was an ordeal of exactness, every rune etched with surgical precision. Yet here, confronting the heart, I sensed something far more alive. Though separated from the basilisk's body, the heart was still defiant, its power roiling beneath the surface like a caged tempest. Professor Gravemore stood a short distance away, leaning on his cane. His gaze was sharp with intellectual curiosity, tempered by caution. "The heart is unlike the others," he said quietly. "The skeleton and skull are passive, waiting to be shaped by your intent. The heart, by its nature, resists. It acts. It will test you, Arthur. I swallowed, my throat suddenly parched. I'm ready, I said, though my stomach twisted with apprehension. Good. Remember the standard method, Gravemore continued. 3 bands around the source, each corresponding to the lich's fundamental aspects: body, mind, and soul. These bands form conduits linking the heart to the skeleton and skull. The difficulty lies not just in forming them but ensuring perfect harmony. One misalignment, and the entire structure collapses. I exhaled, drawing on loosened harmony, sensing my mana shift in response. Luna's blessing flickered along my arms in ghostly sigils. With an effort of will, I suppressed my white star and called forth my black star instead, allowing dark mana to flow through my fingertips. Almost instantly, the room dimmed, as though the overhead lights had lost some of their brilliance. Even Professor Gravemore's silhouette seemed to fade into the gloom, a mere watcher on the edges of my conjuration. Placing my hands on the heart, I felt warmth emanating from that smooth, unsettling surface. The moment my mana made contact, the heart pushed back. It was a fierce rejection, as if it knew I intended to subdue it. Steady, Gravemore said. It's testing your resolve. Show no weakness. I clenched my jaw, forcing my mana forward one careful strand at a time. Thread after thread extended from my fingers, forming the first circular band around the heart's surface. The glow was faint, like embers in a deep cave, but it pulsed with gathering intensity. The heart thrashed against my efforts, and I had to fight to keep each woven strand intact. The first band, the body, served to anchor the heart to the skeleton. It was straightforward in theory but demanded painstaking focus. Each we've had to align with the basilisk's inherent power, or risk snapping apart at a single misstep. My breath came in shallow pants by the time the band solidified around the heart. Professor Gravemore nodded approvingly. Good. Now the second band, mind. If the body band was demanding, the mind band was labyrinthine. The connection to the skull required bridging the lich's consciousness, a delicate thread that would allow it to think, reason, and obey. My arms trembled from the constant push and pull of the heart's living energy. Each mana line had to be scripted with a subtle pattern of commands, lest the lich's mind run rampant or spiral into madness. Time crawled, marked only by the rise and fall of my ragged breathing. After what felt like an eternity, the second band was done, glowing slightly brighter than the first. My forehead dripped with sweat, and my mana reserves felt dangerously low, but the heart was now ringed by 2 distinct circles, each pulsing in tandem. Gravemore's voice, usually so firm, sounded almost gentle. The final band is the soul, he said. Most fail here, Arthur. The lich's essence must be perfectly aligned, or it all unravels. I drew a deep breath and began shaping the third band. This was the core of the lich, where body and mind converged into a singular will. The basilisk's heart flared with renewed vigor, as though some deep instinct warned it of my intentions. My vision blurred, edges darkening. The walls of the lab vanished behind the searing intensity of the heart's glow. Don't lose focus, Arthur, Gravemore intoned, but his voice sounded distant. The soul band took shape under my trembling hands. My mana wove a net around the heart, forging a link that would bind the lich together. And then, halfway through the process, everything changed. A ripple of power, faint at first, coursed through the heart. It crested into a surge so forceful it slammed into my consciousness. My surroundings disintegrated, replaced by a boundless void. The basilisk heart loomed there, impossibly large and pulsing with golden veins like rivers of molten fire. A voice, deep and resonant, called my name. Arthur Nightingale. It resonated through every cell of my body, hypnotic in its allure. I was transfixed. You have come far, the voice said. Few command such resolve. Even fewer such ambition. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Who are you? I managed, voice cracking with strain. I am the will of the basilisk, the voice whispered. A fragment of the being you now harness. And I can grant you what you desire. The void shifted, revealing a grand vista. A mountaintop under a golden sky, armies kneeling in silent devotion. Beside me stood the lich, impossibly majestic, radiating power that dwarfed anything I'd seen. My heart pounded. It was everything I'd ever dreamed. Authority, renown, and an escape from every mortal limit that caged me. Embrace me, the basilisk's will said, a seductive current woven through its tone. Accept my power, and together we will conquer. Your name shall endure for all time. My hand, seemingly of its own accord, stretched out to touch the heart. The vision vibrated with an intoxicating promise. But just as my fingers made contact, the dream shattered. I found myself back in the lab, drenched in sweat, the basilisk heart beneath my hands. I gasped heavily as I touched my beating heart, chest rising and falling in frantic rhythm. I understood it now. Professor Gravemore watched Arthur sway on his feet, eyes glassy from whatever unseen struggle he had just endured. Gravemore had never seen him so pale. The gloom of the lab pressed close, the only light coming from the basilisk heart's bands, now half-forged and flickering. Arthur, Gravemore said carefully, taking a step forward. Are you all right? Arthur did not respond at first. His hands remained planted on the basilisk heart, dark mana sparking fitfully around his fingertips. The final band, the soul, was unfinished, the weave incomplete. Had he run out of mana? Or had the basilisk's will bested him? Just then, Arthur's head snapped up. His eyes were wide, but there was a strange clarity in them. Gravemore braced himself for a collapse. Instead, Arthur drew a shuddering breath and exhaled slowly, as though centering himself. Something had changed in the boy's posture. Stay back, Professor, Arthur said, his voice subdued but not weak. I'm about to try something different. Gravemore felt a spike of unease. Arthur, we must adhere to the known principles. The soul band must follow the sanction method. If you deviate... I know, Arthur replied, voice low. But the basilisk heart is more than a mere power source. I can feel it resisting in ways the standard texts never accounted for. His gaze flicked to Gravemore, then back to the heart. Trust me, Professor, or stop me now. Gravemore's grip on his cane tightened. Everything in him screamed that meddling with the established process was a fool's errand. He had witnessed countless students, each convinced they had a new angle, only to watch them fail catastrophically. Yet Arthur's determination was unsettlingly convincing. The tension in the air crackled, as though fate itself were holding its breath. Arthur, I warn you, Gravemore began, but it was too late. In a single fluid motion, Arthur rearranged his mana threads, severing several lines of the incomplete soul band. Gravemore almost lunged forward in protest. Changing the structure so abruptly? That was unthinkable. But the basilisk heart shuddered, flaring bright in alarm, as though it recognized the shift. Arthur, Gravemore shouted, his voice echoing in the small lab. You'll destroy yourself and everything we've worked for. But Arthur pressed on. With a steadiness that made Gravemore's heart pound,